Support for the CivicSciTV Network comes from listeners and viewers like you, and organizations such as the Rita Allen Foundation, which invests in transformative ideas in their earliest stages to leverage their growth and promote breakthrough solutions to significant problems. Go to ritaallen.org to learn more.
Mapping the global landscape of civic science by dissecting new insights from researchers, practitioners, and leaders in academia, government, for-profit, and nonprofit organizations. This is Questions of the Day with Fanuel Muindi.
Well, welcome back, everybody. My name is Fanuel Muindi, and this is Questions of the Day. And as you know, on my show, what we try to do is map the landscape of civic science by talking to scholars and practitioners who are involved on the ground. And so today is no exception. I'm so excited to be joined by Natalie Nannas, an associate professor of biology at Hamilton College. So get this. So she studies in a nutshell, and Natalie, I'll let you tell us more about what you work on specifically, but how genetic information is packaged basically into chromosomes. In a nutshell, that's kind of what she studies. And so I don't think I did it justice there, but Natalie, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I have to share a disclaimer that we share a link, Natalie and I, that we were both at MCB at different times. This is the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology at Harvard University. She was a graduate student there, and I was the assistant director of graduate studies at a different time point. We didn't quite overlap. And so just a quick disclaimer there. But Natalie, tell us about how did you discover this question, this interest of yours around genetic information and how it's packaged in chromosomes. How did you discover this question, your passion for this question?
Yeah. Well, it's really been a long story and a long evolution. When I was an undergraduate, I was at Grinnell College, and it was a wonderful place where we were just encouraged to ask questions and investigate. And so I did some research with a faculty there who was very focused on DNA and the mistakes that can happen. And so I knew when I went to graduate school that I wanted to keep staying in this world of genetics and molecular biology, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to study. But actually, when I came to graduate school at MCB, I met a fantastic advisor, Andrew Murray, who really focused on this question of chromosomes and how do they pull apart correctly when cells divide. And I just found that fascinating because it's such a dance. There's so many pieces involved. It's so intricate. It's so chaotic, and yet it has to happen right every time for us to be alive, for that information to be passed on to future generations. And so it just really captured my attention. It sparked something in me. I think it was the ability to use microscopes too and be able to watch that process live that really got me excited. And so it's a question that I've just sort of stayed on for the rest of my career because there's always another question and a next question to ask. And so I'm so fascinated by chromosomes and how do they pull apart and how do they know and how does the cell get this delicate process right? So I continued it in my postdoc, and now today in my professorship, I'm still asking questions because we haven't figured it all out.
Yeah, and so on that thread about questions, another area that I think you have a passion for is around public engagement. And I want to just go back maybe to your graduate school days. Was this something that you did during your graduate work or postdoc? And how do you develop it, really? Just tell us about that story.
Yeah. It even predates graduate school. I came from a rural background in Iowa. I had fantastic teachers, but I didn't have access to research. I had never held a pipette before I went to college. And so I was really passionate, even at the undergraduate stage, of sharing my knowledge with other people, helping them get excited about science. And so I was involved in some outreach activities as an undergraduate, trying to get middle school girls excited too about science. So when I got to graduate school, I was really excited to have mentors who encouraged me to not just stay in the lab, but go out and talk to people and pursue that passion. And so, I was involved in several programs there, helping train high school teachers in new lab activities, how to design inquiry-based modules rather than just dry, boring textbooks. And so it's something, that I've continued in a variety of capacities, trying to engage with students at the elementary level, middle school, high school, all the way on up to just talking to the public. Most recently, I was on a panel where we talked about mRNA vaccines and COVID, and what are those things you hear in popular media and what's true, what's not true? Because I think it's really important as scientists to learn how to speak to people of all ages, all groups, to share our knowledge and to get them excited about it as well.
Yeah, and in fact, in one of your grants, I think you're a co-PI on an NSF grant titled "Rebuilding a Kinesin-Based Meiotic Drive System from Defined Components." In a sentence, in the abstract, it reads: "The project will integrate the research with education by engaging students at a predominantly undergraduate institutions in experiments to test the function of maize kinesins in brewery yeast." Now, you at Hamilton College, right? So you really have found a way to integrate, right, your public engagement with the actual research. Can you tell us more about that? How are you thinking, like, in integrating, right, this engagement work and then with your research, and then where do you find the time?
Haven't figured out that last part, but yeah, the part that I get really excited about is when students understand that science isn't a textbook. Science isn't a group of facts that we memorize. Science, biology, genetics, it's all a series of questions. And it's a process of, how do I ask this question and what kind of experiments do I use to get to an answer? And so with the grant that we submitted, one of our ideas was, let's try to move some of the components, some of the genes that we're studying, into another system, into yeast, which is a lot more feasible to work with at an undergraduate institution, just in terms of the time and the pace and the methods. And so my students are doing cutting edge science. They are part of this grant. They are investigating these genes that are responsible for these selfish chromosomes, these chromosomes that cheat the rules of genetics. And so we've actually identified the genes, move them into yeast, and my students are doing meaningful experiments that we then report back to our collaborators. What's our data? What are we finding? And the students just have this intense experience of ownership over a project, a question that has no answer yet. They're going to figure out the answer. And I think that gets them really excited when they realize that it's okay to be wrong. It's okay not to know the answer, because real science, there is no answer yet known. And so that's our sort of undergraduate connection, where my students are actually doing the grant work itself. And then I also ask my students involved in the grant and in the classroom to then take what they learn, take the knowledge that they've gained, and then think of a way to explain it to a broader audience. And so some of the outreach components that we've developed are, let's take some of the results that we've gotten and see if we can make a mini experiment out of it. And then can we take it to, for example, we've partnered with Midtown Utica Community Center, which is a group that serves our multicultural community that we have here in Utica. And so we have little hands-on science experiments that we take to the students and show them, hey, we're doing original research in our lab, and you can be a part of that too. Here is some techniques you can learn, some skills. And then we actually bring them to campus as well at the end of the semester so that they can get involved in the work here too. We've also partnered with some local elementaries. We do a science day where they come to campus, and similarly, we get them excited about science. They actually isolate DNA out of strawberries. It gets very messy. We squish strawberries, and at the end, they have a little tube of DNA, and it's so exciting to hear them say, I'm a scientist now. Like, yes, you are. Scientists are people who get messy and they ask questions and don't just read textbooks. So I think that's been the really exciting part of this work.
Yeah. So you mentioned time, right? You haven't quite figured out time yet. I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about, in terms of impact, right? How are you thinking about impact? Because it's really hard to capture these at times, right? Most of these grants don't have that built in, right? Unless you are intentional about it. But just more broadly, how do you think about impact in this public engagement work that you're doing through your research?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think what I try to do is I think about, all right, what are the different areas that I'm focused on? I'm focused on teaching. I'm focused on research. Now, how can I use those two things synergistically to achieve goals that I have that include educating the students and also trying to bring that information to the broader public? So the things that I've learned how to do and that I try to do for, that sort of time element is, rather than trying to teach and do research separately, I bring my research into the classroom. And so the lab modules that we do in undergraduate genetics are my research. And I tell them, we may not find an answer this semester. We may not get great data, but you are doing real research. So I leverage my research into the classroom. And then similarly in the classroom, what I ask them to do as well in terms of their final projects, rather than writing a boring paper, why don't you create a module that explains a concept to a target audience? And so I let them pick their target audience. And sometimes it's elementary students, middle school students, the general public. And then depending on the course, whether it's focused more on genetics or molecular biology or medicine, whatever our focus is, I have them pick a concept and then work on a media to present that piece of information they want to share. So it could be a video, it could be sort of a news and views, sort of written piece that's accessible to the broader audience. And then we try to find ways to actually put it out there, whether it's publishing it in a journal that is pitched to an audience that they're interested in, whether it's a YouTube video, whether it's a workshop that they hold with our alumni base and explain a concept to them. We try to really go outside of the classroom with their final projects to try to get that element of civic science and explaining science to a broader audience.
Wow, that's amazing. So on that thread, can you tell some examples of what have students done that's been most memorable from what you've seen?
Yeah. Oh boy, I have a couple of favorites. It's hard because there's so many great projects every year. So a couple of them that come to mind are we've launched this YouTube channel called SciKids Network. And what this is we used to, as I mentioned before, we would bring elementary kids to our campus and we do these really fun hands-on experiments. And during the pandemic, all of that had to stop. We were no longer able to bring elementary kids here. We weren't able to engage in our typical outreach efforts. So we thought, maybe rather than seeing this as a negative, is this a way where we can digitize our efforts? Can we get a platform that's actually more broadly accessible? So it's not just limited to the people who locally live here close to Utica. And so what we did in some of my courses is start to film these videos of what are some experiments you can do at home in your kitchen. What are some ways that we could explain, for example, how photosynthesis works, along with an experiment to do it? And so I've had students make several different videos that we've now produced and put on our SciKids Network YouTube channel. That was a great effort that we had launched towards sort of elementary, about 3rd through 6th grade age. But then I've also had some students that have picked a target audience of their peers, other undergraduates. And so I had a student who actually wrote an article, and it was published in the journal Genetics, but it was something called an educational primer. And so it was, let's take a scientific paper, read it, and then explain it at an undergraduate level, but with leading questions, not just here's what the paper is saying, but rather here are some questions that you can be stimulated to try to answer. Can you understand this out of the figures? And so it's been really neat letting my students have that creativity to pick who would they like to explain a concept to, and then learning and processing, how do I do it? It's actually a lot more challenging than I thought. I've learned all this jargon, but how do I strip that back out and explain a concept to my grandma or to, my 6-year-old cousin? And it's been really rewarding to see the creativity they have.
Yeah, and on that thread as well, what have students been telling you and working with you through this, right? Because multiple components. There's a research component and actually communicating it out, right, to the broader public in diverse ways. What are they telling you?
Yeah, a lot of things that I hear are that, like, wow, that's actually, it was really rewarding. It wasn't just, the sort of standard assignment that I was expecting from college. But then it also gives them a skill set that I think I tried to tell them they're gaining, but they don't realize until they sort of go a little further along. For example, in my fall semester classes, they know this is their project. They're working on it. They're maybe buying into it. And then they go home for Thanksgiving and they sit around the table and they talk to their family and they go, oh my goodness, there were so many, pieces of misinformation around that table. And I now had a skill set to talk to my family members about it, right? Rather than just sort of rolling my eyes and being frustrated, I now realized, okay, here are some ways where scientists sometimes fail in terms of how they speak. And here are some ways that I can start these conversations. Here's some vocabulary I can use to gain traction with my family members or explain a difficult concept. And so I hear that they're really excited that they use these skills when talking to their family, to their friends, people who haven't had the same level of scientific training they have.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot in there too. And I'm assuming you have course evaluations, right? That you've done over the years, and
Yes.
there's lots of information there too. You mentioned the SciKids Network, this YouTube channel, right? That was launched. So when was this launched, actually?
Yeah, we actually started working on it in the spring of 2020. We typically bring elementary kids to our campus in the spring and the summertime, and we couldn't do that with the campus being shut down. And so we actually just started with the activity that we usually do in person. And instead, all of my students were remote. We were spread all over the world. And we said, hey, could we each at home in our kitchens film this activity and then stitch all the pieces together, and then put it out there on a platform where we could send it to the local teachers who would have otherwise come, but then also maybe we can get this information, get this activity out to teachers who we wouldn't otherwise have contact with. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was everybody at home in their kitchen with their cameras set up, doing this DNA extraction experiment. And then I had a great team of students who were able to stitch together all of these different pieces of the protocol and then have a final video. But then we realized we didn't have a home for this video. And so we worked together with Hamilton's information technology department here to help me set up this YouTube channel, which we've named SciKids Network. And now we're adding more content to that channel beyond the original video.
So you mentioned, so the audience, educators is one target audience. Is there another audience? Because I think elementary the content is for elementary kids.
Right.
So can you just tell us more about who your target audience is?
Right. Yeah. These videos are pitched at students in the age range of like 3rd grade to 6th grade. And so certainly educators could similarly have these videos and walk through them with their students, but they're really meant to speak directly to the kids. So you don't need to be in a classroom to do this. I had colleagues here on campus who were at home with their children and set up that iPad and here, watch Natalie, and why don't you work along with her in extracting DNA? And what is DNA? And so, yeah, the target audience are really kids in that age range. And we're sort of exploring both younger and older ends of that age range too. We try to provide maybe some variations of the experiment that you could do if you were a bit more advanced. We have a video on photosynthesis. And so what are some other follow-up questions you could ask or different ways you could do this experiment if you've already kind of got the concepts, the basics of it?
So what is the hope for the channel?
Yeah, our hope for the channel is that we can make science, STEM, a far more welcoming and accessible discipline, right? It doesn't have to just be something that happens behind a closed door with a white lab coat on by yourself. I think science is really a collaborative team effort. And I think sometimes younger students have this misconception of it's just for certain people, or it's just, you're alone in a room. And I'm a people person and I don't really like that. Instead, I think science is collaborative. Science is exciting. It's a teamwork, and it should be a space where everybody is welcome. And so I think with the channel, we're trying to highlight that. We're trying to show that science is for everybody. Science is whatever you're curious about and whatever you want to ask about. So one of the things we're trying to do with the channel is grow our content. Right now, we're fairly limited in the videos that we have. They're mostly biology focused, given my expertise. But we would like to expand it out to other STEM fields. We'd like to add additional activities. Most of our content, we have both experiment content and we have like learning module content. And so we'd like to develop both of those, more experiments, more content. And so we're curious what kind of questions or what kinds of areas do both educators and young kids like to learn about? Where are the knowledge gaps, or where are the things they'd like to learn more about? And then I'd like to find collaborators who'd be interested in adding content to our channel and growing our reach.
Yeah, lots of, for those who are listening, there are scientists and funders and all of it, lots of inputs in there, right, that you're sharing. Is there a metric that, if this thing happens, right, then what we're doing with our channel is having an impact? Is there such a quantifiable metric that you hope to see that will tell you that?
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question. And I think it's something that, when we started this effort, we knew we were trying to reach locally, right? We were trying to reproduce an activity that we had lost. And so I think as we expand and how we have a broader reach, I think it will be important to have metrics by which we can measure what is our reach, what is our impact. And so that is something that I'm trying to think about right now, about how can we measure the impact of this channel? Are there ways that we could then pivot to be more impactful? And so any collaborators out there, it's something that I have some colleagues I'm working on, but yes, absolutely. Ideas and feedback on how we can measure impact, I think is really critical, as well as pivot in different directions that would be more helpful.
Yeah, what I'm thinking about is the pedagogical value of these videos, for example, for an educator to say, okay, I'm using them, in my course in the following ways, right? And for them to share that information back to you to say, okay, this is how this video has made an impact, right? Could be one metric, right? The integration of such videos into existing curriculum, for example. Right. Of course, the challenge is tracking that. Right.
Right.
Need
On a large
funding.
scale too, rather than just sort of one of anecdotally. One of the projects that we're working on right now that we would like to put on SciKids Network is we're developing a game-based play for learning the rules of genetics. And so I think a lot of kids sort of approach genetics for the first time from the sort of Punnett square, Mendel and his pea plants, and there's value in that. But I think one thing that I think is missing, learning genetics that way, is the idea of, usually in genetics, we look at offspring, we look at data, we look at a pattern, and then we sort of back figure what were the parents, what were their genes, based on what we're looking at right now generationally. And so I think that's an example of the difference between how we do science as scientists and the kind of exciting part versus the approach that's typically used in the classroom of, here is the answer, you will learn that piece of information. And so we're trying to develop this game board based play where students have alleles, they have genes, and then they pass them out to the offspring, and then they quantify and quantitate, what is the pattern I'm seeing. And so that's something that we're doing in conjunction with the American Society of Plant Biology, and they are asking us for then assessments. So how are we going to assess learning out of this game? Forms of assessment that teachers in the classroom can use. And so that might be a great example of, we would like to put this on YouTube, on our SciKids Network, both the game itself, the rules, and the assessments, and then gathering that feedback from teachers in terms of how is this playing out in your classroom.
Yeah, and we were talking offline about platforms that could help you in that effort, like Lab Exchange. And I know they'll probably be watching this later, so definitely do get in touch with Natalie. I wish we could just keep talking, and as we talked offline, this is just an opening, right? We want to begin to have the conversation. I tell all my guests this is just the beginning of that conversation. What additional support, Natalie, do you need in doing this work, right? You mentioned, you're a professor, you're teaching, you're doing research. You don't have enough time in a day, really, right? What additional support do you wish you had?
Yeah, Hannah, that's an excellent question. I think it can be challenging as a faculty member at a primarily undergraduate institution, where we are asked to engage in both scholarship and teaching. And so, like I say, I try to combine the two as best I can to leverage my time to make progress on both fronts. But I think things that could be really helpful to us is funding to support both students, helping us develop these modules. It's a lot to ask the students to fully own a project if it's just in a course for the semester. But we all know projects go longer than a semester. And so being able to hire a student to finish that video, right? Finish that last 20% so we can get to completion. It could be, support for equipment and reagents and things that we need to develop these modules. It could be support for faculty themselves, right? Time over the summer to invest in developing these sorts of modules. I think that it is important because, we certainly ask faculty to do a little more. We ask, then I in turn ask my students to do a little more. And so I think funding and support can certainly help us both prioritize that work and make sure it happens, as well as give people the support that they need and the space they need to bring things to full completion.
Yeah, and you found, I think, a home, really, a place where you are integrating these multiple components and being your truest self, if I say it that way. I wanted to ask you in this kind of last minute or two here some advice, right? And I want to point out some specific groups of people and just share your thoughts and advice. So other researchers, scientists, right, who are thinking about how do I integrate civic science, right, more broadly, public engagement into my research, right? In a sentence or two, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think that, the advice that I got when I was a young faculty starting here was, this idea of synergy, right? There's only so many hours in the day. So let's actually try to bring all those projects that you're working on together so that you can move them forward, as well as try to finish those projects and then share them in a way that's going to be helpful for you in your career development, right? So a lot of us have great ideas and we have great projects we're working on, and then we maybe don't do as well at that last step of writing a paper of what we've done, getting it published, sharing it, getting it out there, taking it to conferences, because we're so busy and the project's mostly done, but we don't think about that last step. And I think that's really important for career development, is getting that landmark of, yes, I did that thing, and then now here it is. Here it is in the public domain in a way that you can be acknowledged for it, and now it can help grow your career development.
Yeah. And then for graduate students, current graduate students, right, who are maybe up there about to graduate, they're thinking about where to go, what to do next. What do you tell them?
Yeah. I think it really depends on what your interests are and what your
Right.
career path is. Absolutely. And I think, breaking out of the traditional mold of, well, everybody's doing this, so I should do that too, right? And I think really spending that time trying to envision, where do you want to be? And based on where you want to be, go talk to people who are doing that thing and ask them, how did you get there? I was lucky in the sense that I knew I wanted to be a faculty member at a liberal arts college, so I kind of knew the path I needed to take. But identifying that goal out there and then finding others who are ahead of you and asking their advice, I think is hugely helpful. Because I think sometimes we get so down in the weeds as scientists that we don't take that moment to say, like, where am I trying to go? Where would I like to be in 5 years, in 10 years? And so what are the different steps I can take today to get to that point eventually?
Yeah, I think that speaks to also just goal setting a little bit, right? And even in public engagement, setting goals. And there's been ongoing more and more research coming out about how important that is, right? What are your goals and for which audience and all that jazz, right? In terms of thinking about civic science, so there are scholars in this space and there are also practitioners. What questions, I guess, in your mind are circulating right now? Because again, your feet on both camps, right? Research and public engagement. Are there things that I wish I got more connections with science practitioners or science communities, or I wish I was able to read all those million papers that are coming out in civic science? I'm curious from your end, right? Being a scientist on the bench in the trenches, what are you thinking about when you think about civic science more broadly and the scholars and practitioners in the space?
Yeah. I think it is a challenge. Obviously, when you have so many different things going on once, so many different projects and efforts, and to stay current and to keep up with
right.
all of the really neat things that are happening. And so that's where I try to leverage folks around me who know more than I do. And I try not to be annoying, but leaning on them to, hey, what have you heard? Like, trying to have them be your literature review, essentially, right? On what are the kind of new and current things? Because it is hard for an individual person. It's impossible for an individual person to know all things in all spheres at all times. So I think, using your network, getting connected with people who know that world better than you. And I think one of the things that was hard for me when I was first getting started is that I felt a little bit in isolation, right? I'm a bench scientist. I've been trained in molecular biology and genetics. This is what I do. But I'm really excited about civic science. I'm really excited about science literacy. And I see these problems in the world. And so how can I get involved?
Right.
And are my projects in isolation? And I think that's where you can start to lose momentum, because you think you're alone and you think you're trying to do this big lift on your own. So I think finding a community, making connections. I'm excited to explore lab exchange more. Ways where you can leverage the work that you're already doing or the passions you have to connect to an audience, to keep that momentum going, other people that are involved in this work. So I think for me, I still feel very new in this direction. It's just something I'm really excited about. So I think that's something I will try to do in my own work as well too, is make those connections, find ways to bring projects that I'm doing to other folks, and then get inspiration from them as well to continue moving forward, keeping the momentum.
Yeah, and you mentioned this isolation. I think that is definitely something that I shared as well earlier on, as I wanted to explore this space, right? And the surprising thing is, like, I think there's some wonderful communities, even societies. The ASCB, for example, has a really vibrant public engagement core, if you will, right? And I think find those communities and being sort of current, right, and reaching out to them. So we will leave it here for now. Clearly, there's so much more to discuss. I think in the future I want to get into some more on the evaluation side, how you're thinking about it, right?
Yep.
But for now, we'll leave it there. Natalie, this was fantastic. Looking forward to having you back very soon.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed it.